Welcome back to another day here at Christ Table as we are journeying through our Bible study in 1 Peter called Bittersweet. My name is Kevin Young. I have the privilege of being lead clergy here at Christ Table. If you'd like to know more about Christ Table, who we are, what we do among those who are discouraged, disillusioned, disappointed with the church, you can go to that URL right there, www.christstable.today. Would encourage you when you get there to sign up for the email list so that you'll know everything that's going on around Christ Table. If you'd like more information on this Bible study, you can go to the URL in front of me, go.christstable.today/bittersweet. A couple of resources there, absolutely free, that you can download. A list of all the days that are in this study, all the readings that go along with those days. Plus, there is a second download, a PDF curriculum guide that'll walk you through each and every day of the study. We'll take you deeper. Both of those absolutely free. If you'd like a printed copy, we do offer these. All you have to do when you get to the URL is click Get the Box, and we send a spiritual resource box with this curriculum inside of it, as well as several other resources to help you. One of the things that is in there as well is this book, The Sweet Spot, which talks about how pleasure can come out of suffering, can lead to suffering, how trauma and suffering, maybe not trauma, but suffering, difficult things can actually be a positive thing in life in certain ways. And so we're going through this on Wednesday nights in a book club. Actually, you can be a part of that if you want to know more about it. All you got to do is sign up right there for the email list at www.christstable.today. One other thing that I want to make sure that you are aware of, if you are disappointed, disillusioned, discouraged with the church, if you have doubts, if you are frustrated with Christianity, with the church, with Christians, trying to navigate your faith, deconstruction, this book is for you or for somebody you know who's like that. If you'd like more information on that, go to drkevinyoung.com, and it's available wherever books are sold. So we said that we've been in 1 Peter the last few days, and that is true. 1 Peter is a book that is written to the early church that is facing a lot of suffering. And so one of the things that we've said is that it's not a one-to-one. The suffering that they're going through is nothing like any suffering that we here in U.S. America go through. But in some of these things, we can look at it and say, there might be some helpful advice here for us whenever we face difficulties. Today, day 15 of the study, we find ourselves beginning a new chapter, chapter 4. We're going to tackle verses 1 through 6 in this study. And why don't we begin with just kind of a recap? We've come through a lot. In fact, I think we have one more week maybe in the study. And so we've come through a lot of the study at this point, and it should be coming clear to you, to me, as to what Peter's kind of main theme here and what's going on in his mind. And hold on is one of those themes, but one of the main reasons why Peter says to hold on is because he also seems to believe that suffering can improve the life of the believer. The Sweet Spot, this book, The Pleasures of Suffering and the Search for Meaning. The author here, Paul Bloom, actually talks a lot about how suffering and difficulty, things that we might avoid, actually can improve our lives. And he even makes the case here that it is necessary for some difficulty, some suffering to be in our life, for there to be actually a life that is in any way worth living. We don't usually think of difficulty, suffering, and trouble in that way, but Peter also seems to indicate the same thing, that suffering does not have to always be trauma, but that suffering can lead to positive things. Not as though we chase suffering and chase difficulty, but if it's unavoidable, we can at least rest assured in knowing that if we hold on, for the Christian, there are benefits and rewards that God has promised to us for enduring, but also not just in the next life, but in this life as well, Suffering can be transformative, can be transformational in the life of a believer. So let's go ahead and jump into our text, 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 1. So then, since Christ suffered physical pain, remember, he's always bringing us back to Jesus, bringing us back to that anchor. Since Christ suffered physical pain, you must arm yourself with the same attitude that he had and be ready to suffer too. Peter is essentially saying that nobody gets out better than Jesus. Nobody gets out of this life having gone through a better or easier journey than Jesus. That all of us have to be ready to suffer, and all of us have to be ready to have the same attitude that Jesus had in that suffering, which feels a bit like a steep request. But I think what Peter is doing here is he's giving them something aspirational. He's giving them a goal. He's giving them something to look at and say, Christ did this, you can do it too. Christ went through this, you can go through it too. It's unavoidable. Since Christ suffered physical pain, you're suffering physical pain, and oftentimes they really were. Martyrdom is starting to happen here. Beatings were starting to happen here. And Peter says, essentially, I wish I could change that, but be ready to suffer too. For if you have suffered physically for Christ, you have finished with sin. Peter is essentially saying that you only have a finite amount of effort, intentionality, opportunity in your life, and that scale can be balanced in one way or the other, towards Christ, towards sin, towards others, towards self, towards things that are holy and sanctifying and transformational, or things that tend to be more destructive and crumbling and toxic and cancerous. If you've suffered physically for Christ, then you've finished with sin. Peter is kind of saying here, if you're in this place of suffering for Jesus, then you're not going to have a lot of time to worry about sin or actually participate in sin. You won't spend the rest of your life chasing your own desires, but you will be anxious to do the will of God. Peter is essentially kind of communicating to them that suffering has this redemptive value in your time and in your heart and in your mind. And so whenever there is suffering, it sharpens the iron in us. It takes the blade down to its point and to its sharpest edge. It's like I substitute taught today in our kids' school. Few kids were using like one of those old crank pencil sharpeners that's, attached to the wall. There's this little sign that said, welcome Luddites. And if you don't know what a Luddite is, you can Google the word Luddite. And so, there were some kids there that were sharpening that pencil. And I think what Peter is saying here is kind of like that sharpening of that pencil, that blade gear system that's in there that brings suffering and trauma to the wood of the pencil, sharpens it so that it is able to accomplish what it was designed for better. And if it gets dull, then it has to suffer the sharpener again before it's able to be used again. Peter is saying if you're spending your life in the pencil sharpener being sharpened, then you're going to end up in a situation in your life where you're going to be anxious to do the will of God. You're going to be anxious to utilize all of the things that you have learned from that suffering in order to be used in the service of God or in the service of others. You're not going to want to spend your life chasing your own desires. You're not going to want to spend your life doing your own thing. So, I went to the dentist the other day, and there's always one conversation that the dentist always has with me. I have gums that are aggressive in how they grow. But until a dentist and the tech get to know me, they think that it is my brushing my teeth, my use of mouthwash or lack thereof on brushing my teeth and use of mouthwash, the lack thereof on my use of floss. And so they're always giving me this conversation about flossing and brushing and working on the plaque. And I will admit, I don't do great at especially the flossing, but it's not going to change the situation that they're worried about in the gums. It will change some things. But, I was sitting there thinking about the amount of time, it doesn't take that much time. The text said, to floss your gums and under your teeth. What, like 5 minutes, maybe at most? Like it's really fast, especially when you get good at it. But that adds up, right? 5 minutes, 7 times a week becomes 35 minutes. You've got a half an hour, a couple of weeks, you've got an hour, a month, a year. It's a lot of time that adds up just spending it flossing. But it's like ROI, right? What's the return on investment? The return on investment is probably pretty good for your teeth in utilizing that time in that way. But other things may not be. It may be, I'll spend 2 or 3 minutes doing this. But when you add up the amount of time you'd spend doing that over your life, would you look at that and say, that was really a wise use of those hours and hours and hours and days of my time doing it? That's kind of what Peter has in mind here, this mounting up of bad things or things that are a waste of time. You've had enough, verse 3, he says, in the past of the evil things that godless people enjoy. Their immorality, their lust, their feasting, their drunkenness, their wild parties, their terrible worship of idols. Peter is saying, there are some things that are common, happen a lot with godless people. Your version may say with pagans, with people who are utilizing their time in ways that may or may not be contrary to the heart of Jesus, God's word. Some of them may be, some of them may not be, but in the grand scheme of things, in the utilization of our time in total, 2 or 3 minutes might not be a big deal. But in the grand scheme of things, that time starts adding up, and maybe it could be better used or better served in other ways. Peter's saying, you've had enough of that old life, spending way too much time, way too much energy, things that are essentially a waste in your old life. Of course, your former friends are surprised when you no longer plunge into the flood of wild and destructive things that they do. So they say things about you, and then that's going to make you want to go back and do it because of the compelling peer pressure. But remember, they're going to face God just the same as you are, who stands ready to judge everyone, both the living and the dead. At some point, we're all going to be judged for what we've done, right? In our life. That's what Peter is saying here. And I think, there are lots of different opinions on the judgment. For me, I think looking into Jesus' face in that moment, I'm going to judge myself. And that may well be the harshest judgment, is standing there before Christ, standing there before Jesus, and in that moment recognizing I spent my time well. Those small moments, 2 or 3 moments a day, I spent them well. They added up to some positive transformational things for me and for other people around me. I was the hands and feet of Jesus. Or I'm going to look in Jesus' face and think, hey, yeah, in the moment I thought that was only 2 or 3 minutes, but now looking back, I see the days and weeks in total that I spent doing those things. And that wasn't maybe things that were the best use of my time and energy. And now I might do it differently. I'm going to judge myself harshly for those. Remember that all those people who are wasting their time, on things that are sinful, things that are not helpful, things that are not transformational, things that actually may be counterproductive to getting them to where they want to go, becoming better people, becoming better humans, they're going to have to someday face God, who stands ready to judge both the living and the dead. And then in verse 6, we have another one of those kind of left turn verses from Peter that at first seems a little out of place from where he is, and it's a little difficult to understand. Peter says, that's why the good news was preached to those who are now dead. So although they were destined to die like all people, they now live forever with God in the Spirit. A lot of people look at this and think, oh, good news was preached to those who were dead. This is talking about Jesus going down into hell in those 3 days between the resurrection and the crucifixion, preaching to the captives, yada, yada, yada. That doesn't really, in the original language and in context, seem to be what's going on. What seems to be going on here is that Peter is essentially saying, for all of those people who have already died, who were saints, who are followers of Jesus, martyrs, they may now be dead, but their soul now lives and is waiting. So that's why the good news was preached to those who are now dead. So Christians who have already passed away. So although they were destined to die like all people, they now live forever with the Spirit of God. Peter says everybody dies. Even those who have believed the good news of Jesus, everybody dies the same. But those people who are dead, even though they died like everybody else, they, unlike this godless world who's spending their time and energy in wasteful ways, but those who didn't do that, they now live forever with the Spirit, or with God in the Spirit. So Peter is in this text looking forward. Peter has done that a lot, actually, in our journey through this book, has encouraged people. And right, whenever suffering and trauma are happening, it's very hard for us to think outside of the moment. We get stalled, we get stuck, we get caught up in the overthinking and the trauma of the moment, and we forget all of the stuff that's in their past, and we forget that all of the stuff that will be in the future as well. And Peter has continued to remind people who they are, which is a compilation of where they've come from, but also where they're going, what the story will be from here for people who are followers of Jesus. And so all of that essentially to say, Peter says here at the end of our study text today, something that he has kind of continued to reiterate over and over. Don't lose sight of what's ahead. It can become very easy during seasons of suffering to get so laser focused on the present, we totally forget that we live in a world that's moving forward with people who need us and whom we need. Don't let that happen to you. Don't lose sight of what's ahead. And for Peter, with Christians, what is ahead is always good because it always ends with us, with Jesus. Not because of our good deeds, but because of the work that Christ has already done for all of us. It's been good to be with you today. Make sure that you stop by the website, go.christstable.today/bittersweet. Download those materials. I look forward to hearing your feedback on this study. Look forward to being back with you next week as we continue on. No, actually tomorrow. Yeah, we have one more day in the study this week. Look forward to being back with you tomorrow as we continue on this study.